What's going on, everybody? This will probably be a quicker video. I've got my kids here with me today. They're sick from school, so I apologize in advance if you hear some kids shows in the background. And it looks like so far we're seeing a bit of a flat day. This could be due to weekly options expiration today. Market doesn't want those calls to print, so we're seeing some sideways action eating away from those calls premium. But in this brief video, I'm going to go over Bitcoin and CleanSpark on the chart. We're going to talk about how this run is just the beginning. We haven't even had retail really enter yet. But let's get started here. If you get something useful out of this video, make sure you like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. And first, let's look at Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is slightly up today, sitting at roughly 61,900. Very slight green day for Bitcoin, pretty flat day for the miners, to be honest. Yesterday was a pretty rough red day. Hopefully a lot of you were taking advantage and buying. And in a second here, I'll try to address what I think the Bitcoin miners will do when rewards are cut. This has been a recurring question for the last probably 6 months or even longer. Are we going to see a big dip for the miners in anticipation of rewards getting cut? And you got to realize, the market could already be pricing that in. It could be pricing it in right now. It could already be priced in. All I know is if these miners do see a considerable dip from here, it will be a great opportunity to add. And just think about how bullish this Bitcoin halving is for Bitcoin. We have huge amounts of spot ETF buying, and imagine what that buying pressure does to Bitcoin when the incoming supply of Bitcoin per day is cut in half. This spot Bitcoin ETF buying pressure will cause Bitcoin's price to increase even more once the incoming supply of Bitcoin gets cut in half. It's going to be very exciting to see how Bitcoin runs in this cycle. Imagine the scarcity of Bitcoin when retail finally enters, when retail finally gets FOMO, when we see those all-time highs. Speaking of all-time highs, can Bitcoin see its all-time high before the halving? Well, that's something we haven't seen before, and while it's certainly possible, I'm inclined to think that we will see some sort of cool down. However, consider this, Bitcoin can keep running from here. While it is quite overbought on the weekly, and I've mentioned this before, but I just want to hammer this in. While it is quite overbought on the weekly, we have seen a much more overbought RSI before we finally corrected. Bitcoin could very well try to test its all-time high before the halving. And if we just continue running from here, with no real cooldowns in sight, with no real pullback of the RSI, getting the RSI to more neutral, if we just keep running and running and running, I do think all-time high would turn out to be our resistance. And while I'm very bullish long-term on Bitcoin, while I do believe it's going to be much higher in price in 2024, that's obvious information, anyone can tell you that. And while I do think it's a solid DCA, even here, even with an overbought weekly like this, just be aware that if you are buying here, it is possible we head down. It is possible those buys go against you, that you turn red on it. And while some people are saying Bitcoin can head all the way down to 30,000, break 40,000, I personally find that extremely unlikely. Can we theoretically, potentially, head down and test a previous resistance and ascending resistance as a support? We certainly can. We can definitely come down and test maybe 56,000. That's definitely something that, in my opinion, is reasonable. But for you to wait for Bitcoin to potentially hit 30,000, I think that's something that's not worth doing. I do think on any weakness for Bitcoin, on any dips, it is a buying opportunity. And I do believe being too patient will bite you in the ass in the end. The time to be patient with Bitcoin was throughout 2022 and the beginning of 2023, slowly but surely adding. Being patient through the pain, being patient through the bear market. And while now is certainly not the time to get FOMO, I also believe now is not the time to avoid Bitcoin completely. I do think it's a solid DCA even here. And looking at CleanSpark, a lot of you have been taking advantage here. And many of you have made some smart trades here and sold near the top, starting to add as we approach the bottom. I do think we're at a pretty important point for CleanSpark chart-wise. And look at this line in yellow. This was a previous resistance, tried to flip as a support. We kind of bounced around it, to be honest, in this period. It did become a support before we blasted off. And now we're back at it again, trying to hold it as a support. And while I do believe CleanSpark's a buy here, we have definitely cooled off sufficiently. It's nearly retraced 35% from its peak, but that's not to say we can't head lower. If the market doesn't hold it at 16, we could definitely head towards this 1550 area, where we would also have the opportunity to test our 100 EMA. But these EMAs are all bullish. They're all ascending. They're in a bullish order with the 200 on the bottom, the 100 in the middle, and the 50 on the top. And our moving averages are very bullish as well, both pointing up and both in the correct order. One thing you need to realize though, if we head so far away from these moving averages, EMAs, what have you, the market almost always pulls back, tries to head at least kind of towards them. Does that mean we have to head all the way to $12 and test our 50 EMA here? It doesn't necessarily mean that. But after a huge run like that, we were simply due to cool down a bit. It is completely normal. CleanSpark's chart is still very bullish. And while short term we may head lower, you better believe looking back at the end of 2024, in mid 2025, this will be seen as purely a buying opportunity. Now, I also want to talk about what's going on with Bitcoin and retail investors. Retail investors are sleeping on Bitcoin's march towards all-time highs. And like always, most but not all, keep in mind many of you are already in Bitcoin, you guys are ahead of the curve. Most retail enters after we see all-time highs. That's when they start hearing about Bitcoin. And while in real life, you might be hearing more and more chatter about Bitcoin, still, at least from my perspective, most people you ask about Bitcoin, they have no idea what the hell you're talking about. They don't understand the 4-year cycle, and they don't care to understand it. Metrics that previously signaled retail froth are still at low levels, suggesting that this phase of Bitcoin's rally is driven by institutional investors. And into the block analysts pointed to middling web page searches for Bitcoin on Google and application downloads. Notably, crypto exchange Coinbase's app rose to #1 spot by downloads in Apple's store in late 2021 October. We're not there yet. And while transaction volume on the Bitcoin blockchain has been increasing, it is nowhere near the levels we experienced during market peaks in 2021. And remember how market cycles work, not just Bitcoin's halving cycle, but actual market cycles. You have the accumulation phase. This usually kicks off the bull run. This is when the big boys, the smart money, gets in low, and then retail pushes it up, and then they sell high, while retail holds the bag. What's going on right now with Bitcoin suggests that institutional investors could be steering this phase. Eyes are on ETFs as potential accumulators. And while you might be looking at these spot Bitcoin ETFs, saying these were recently approved, these spot Bitcoin ETFs, these guys are all buying at a $49,000 Bitcoin and up. Many of us were buying Bitcoin when it was 15,000, 20,000, 25, 30,000, 35, 40,000. But in reality, we're still so early. Whales and institutions likely see this as the accumulation phase before the halving, before 2025, and the huge bull rally year. And just think about this, we've seen $6.7 billion in net ETF inflows. Imagine the effect of something like this on price after Bitcoin's halving, when every day new Bitcoin introduced is cut in half. Well, as long as we're not seeing half as much ETF buying volume, this type of buying pressure will cause Bitcoin to run up much higher than pre-halving. And it's going to be really exciting to see the first couple of weeks after the halving what the buying pressure from these ETFs will bring. How much does Bitcoin go up when Bitcoin's incoming supply is cut in half? Not to mention when we see all-time highs and retail really starts talking about Bitcoin, everyone starts really piling in. And that's why I say while we're overbought on the weekly on Bitcoin, I'm still very bullish on Bitcoin. I still see it as an ad here. Although sure, short term we could pull back. We could see the 50s again. Wouldn't be surprising. And while from a chart perspective, it'd probably be the time to be a little hesitant with Bitcoin. From a fundamental perspective, we're approaching the most exciting event for Bitcoin, the Bitcoin halving. Well under 2 months away now. Before you know it, it'll be only a month away. The clock is ticking. But thanks as always for watching, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this shorter video. Let me know what miners you're taking advantage of today and yesterday. Yesterday was definitely another great day. And how are you playing some of these Bitcoin miners? Are you selling puts on them as we're dropping? Did you sell covered calls on that recent run up? Are you buying deep out of the money calls for late 2025 or something? Let me know in the comments below, guys. Thanks as always for watching and have a good weekend.